Hi, I'm Dr. Katrina Jones of KKJ Forensic and Psychological Services, and today I'm here with Lisa Gabriel from Pinafore Wealth, and she's going to talk to us about general anxiety related to financial situations right now with the COVID crisis. And I'm going to let her talk to us a little bit about what she does, and then we'll get into it.
Great. Well, Pinafore Wealth is a registered investment advisory firm. So we are a fiduciary and we're located in Durham. And today there is an awful lot of anxiety around the COVID crisis. And then you add the financial aspect to it. And it can really throw people off balance. And it can cause you to focus on short-term decision making instead of your long-term goals. So we try to help you frame that in your mind of what's most important, what should you be thinking of, and what should you not be thinking of during this
Right.
time.
What should you not be maybe overly worried about, right?
Right.
So one of the reasons, Lisa, that I wanted to do this with you is that every time I've ever had a conversation with you, I always feel calmer, whatever we're talking about. So I think that for you to be able to help everybody who might watch this feel a little bit better about how they're dealing with their money or what they do or don't pay attention to will be great. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
So how about we talk about, you and I talked before and talked about having like a money story that everybody has that and kind of knowing what that is and how to balance out your risk tolerance. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. We all have a money story, and the research shows that our money story is typically written by the time we're age 5. So if we're not reading at that point, it's observing what we feel, what we intuit through our family and everyone that we're exposed to as children. And we bring that money story with us through life, whether it's a money story of abundance or whether it's a money story of scarcity. And that really impacts how we live our lives. And when you get into a volatile time like we're in now with so many unknowns, we will tend to over focus on some things that maybe we really shouldn't, that maybe we should be a little step back a little bit from and not let those drive our decision making. And so what we find is that with people's money story, it will often impact the financial decisions that they make for themselves instead of separating the money story and recognizing it for what it is, because we all have one, and looking at what is my risk tolerance and what is my risk capacity. And am I invested appropriately for that? Your risk tolerance is what keeps you up at night. Your risk capacity is what abilities do you have to build wealth. And so if you think about your risk capacity, how much risk are you taking in your life overall? And we generally will contrast, if you're an entrepreneur, you may be using up your whole risk budget on putting it all on the line and being an entrepreneur.
Right.
So maybe you have less capacity to take risk in the financial markets because you've already used all your risk.
Right.
So for your capacity versus if you, let's say you're a tenured professor and you're not going to lose your job, your income is secure, you may have more capacity to take risk. You may not have the tolerance for more risk. You may say, I want to keep it all under the mattress, even though you have the capacity to take more. And so it's really trying to work through those two things. What is your capacity and what is your tolerance?
And so what would you say if somebody says they have a really high tolerance, like they don't get bothered, and yet they probably shouldn't think that they have the capacity that they imagine themselves to have, right? Like I can tolerate risk
Uh-huh.
And that just means that I'll be able to do a whole bunch of stuff that maybe you would advise me not to do.
And we do see that. What we think of it as kind of a teeter-totter, where going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So if your capacity is way up here,
Mm-hmm.
then what we would say is we need to equalize that a little bit. And so if your capacity is up here, we may say, well, we need to keep your investments a little more conservative to
Mm-hmm.
get it to here.
Gotcha.
If your tolerance is down here, but your capacity is up here,
Mm-hmm.
we might try to bring you this way a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's really trying to find the happy medium, because what you will find is someone with a very high risk tolerance
Mm-hmm.
could be someone that feels that they have a very high capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And people have a different risk tolerance when the market's going up than what they do
Right.
when the market's going down. And
Sure.
so it's really trying to blend that. And you'll see that within couples as well. Some
Mm-hmm.
one partner may have a very, very high risk tolerance, and
Mm-hmm.
another one may have a very low risk tolerance.
Yeah.
And there's
That's what my
also
household's like.
and there are different risk tolerances for different pools of money
Right.
as well. If you're saving for a down payment on your house, then that money really should be kept very safe.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 529 money for college savings and
Mm-hmm.
your child is 5 and you have a 13 to 15-year time horizon for that
Right.
money, then you can be a little further out the risk spectrum for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in your 30s and it's retirement money, then you may look at that a little differently as well. What we tend to see is that women are much more risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
And the research has shown that we're all some level of risk averse, that a 10% loss feels way worse than a 10% gain.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. hmm So that's how we try to look at it, is what is your money story and what is that in perspective to these other type of risk measures, and how might that be influencing how
So
you look
then
at your
how do you take
financials?
somebody's money story, or I think particularly, I think about how couples deal with money. It's a big issue for a lot of couples.
hmm
How do you take that and help them develop a spending plan and coming up with realistic expectations? I think especially if there's that difference in, well, we've got enough money, we can spend it here, and the other person's like, no, because we can never spend any of our money because we
That's
have to have
right.
it in case something crazy happens, and we need
hmm
to have a good base, right? So it's not necessarily totally unrealistic, but the kind of difference between how people would view it.
You rarely have two people who are exactly on the same page for tolerance and capacity, and we all come from whatever background we were raised with. And
Mhm.
so some of it is education. And for the person who is more conservative, is to educate them on how the markets move and how
Mhm.
they can possibly inch out of their comfort zone a little bit if
Mhm.
they have a certain amount of safe money.
Mhm.
And what we say is everybody has a number. Everybody has a number in their mind
Mhm.
that they need to feel comfortable and safe with their
Mhm.
bank account. So
Mhm.
we will often say, what's your number?
Mhm.
When my husband and I got married, he told me 30 years ago, this is my number. And as long as that money's in the bank, do whatever you want. But I
Mhm.
need that number to be in the bank.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we'll try to help the more conservative partner feel, what's your number? And once that number is safe in the bank and you have these long-term goals, how can we inch along here? And then
Mhm.
to the partner who feels they have a higher risk tolerance, to help them to understand that the more conservative partner you've got to balance those two things with, you may have this risk tolerance, but for your situation, and never to take more risk than you have to.
Right.
Some people don't have to take a lot of risk. They've done a good job saving, and if they just continue to save at the rate they're going, they don't have to take big risks. So even though someone may have a higher risk tolerance, there's no reason to take that extra risk.
Right. Right. And so then if you're helping them develop like a spending plan, part of what it sounds like you're doing is couples counseling.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Or even if it's not a couple, if it's an individual, some individual counseling, right? To kind of recognize what you actually need, what you actually have, if you want to take a risk, where you take that risk. And so then if you are thinking along the lines of, like right now, people are, I think, kind of reestablishing, rethinking, right? Like maybe they thought they had a certain kind of money story and now they're finding out it's different. Or they thought they had a good spending plan and now they're finding out they didn't, you know, in any sort of direction. So how would you help if somebody's right now kind of figuring out, oh, this is not working? How would you help them set some goals and kind of figure out what to do moving forward in their situation?
We would try to break it down. First, we look at the bank accounts and the credit card statements, and we say, what do you think you're spending? And they'll give us numbers of what they think they're spending. Then we will break it down, and we often find that people who they think they're spending X and they're really spending Y, and it's usually 25 to 50% more than they think, because so many things just kind of fall through the cracks, or we just don't think about them, or we don't want to think about them. So once we're realistic about, okay, this is what it costs, or this is what we're spending, and do we have realistic goals? If our goal is to retire at 62, and we kind of work through the numbers and we say, well, based upon what you're spending, that goal is not really going to be achievable at this point. Can we go back through the spending plan and figure out what we need, what we might need to change? And some things, and we tell people, tell us what's non-negotiable to you.
Right.
There are certain items in the budget that are non-negotiable. With some couples, we're seeing they're helping elderly parents. That expense is non-negotiable. Or their child is in a program that's non-negotiable. So we need to know what those non-negotiables are to see if those numbers will really work. And some of it is just raising our consciousness, because we've been so busy. Now we've come to a complete stop. And people are kind of thinking this through. And gee, I heard a podcast the other day for Freakonomics, and they were talking about, will we go back to restaurants as much as we did? And how will we spend on food and meals going forward? And one gentleman from one of the associations said that up to 50% of our food budget is coming from either what he called fast casual pickup, or someplace like Applebee's, or, you know, some of it is fast food, but that their expectation is that as this changes, people will be reevaluating their food budget, because they will have been home and maybe their food patterns have changed. But that's one of the areas when we do a spending plan that we find that people really think they're spending one thing and they're really spending something else.
Right, right. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if, like, I could see it going both ways, right? That people will be, oh, I want to be able to go out because I haven't been going out, or get takeout or whatever, because they have felt restricted from doing that. And I can also see people saying, oh, maybe cooking at home isn't as bad as I thought, or as hard as I thought, or if I plan for it, I can get it done. It'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it really will. And so we work through the spending plan, and then we try to figure out, are your goals realistic?
Mm-hmm.
Is this realistic for you, or you and your family, or you and your partner, or and try to really get aligned with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so, I think this isn't necessarily directed to money, but I think, it's all kind of connected, that a lot of us, most of us really, are feeling anxious about what do we know, what don't we know, what do we have control over, what don't we have control over. So much is like living day by day, which is ironic because often we're, kind of, as mental health people, we're spouting the mantra of like live day by day, but that's generally also with a sense of where you're going, right? Like that you're not overly focused on the future, but that you aren't forgetting to live in the moment. And now we're all very in the moment, but not necessarily in a good way,
Right.
right? So, we're talking to people about how do you kind of manage your anxiety and what you can and can't control, and how you deal with not knowing and the kind of ambiguity of it all. So I would imagine that's also coming up for you.
It is. And we really try to focus on what can we control.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have your risk tolerance set right? Do you have enough of an emergency fund?
Mm-hmm.
Have you, do you know what your number is? And do you have that set aside that makes you feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we try to look at the investments and are you invested appropriately?
Mm-hmm.
And are there any changes that need to be made to that? Because sometimes really the best thing to do is to do nothing. When
Right.
you get in a lot of volatility,
Mm-hmm.
you could get whipsawed. And sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing
Right.
and to take a deep breath and focus on something else, because we can't control, and we really think the next 18 months could be very volatile for the
Mhm.
markets, because
Right.
we have an election coming up in 6 months or so. That's
Right.
always a volatile time.
Yeah.
We have industries that basically are going to have to get started again, and that could take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. And so sometimes if your allocation is fine
Mhm.
and you're ticking the other boxes, sometimes the best thing to do is nothing, and don't look at it.
Mhm.
Don't
Right.
look at it every day. Don't put it on your phone.
Mhm.
If you're invested well and you understand why you're invested that way, and your investments reflect your values, then sometimes you just do nothing, and then focus on, is there something I could do for somebody else? Can I
Mhm.
help somebody else? Because that always makes you feel better.
Mhm.
And try to we had a funny story where a gentleman came in and he had lost both of his parents in a very short period of time.
Mhm.
And he was really grieving that loss. And he had inherited some money. And what we said to him, he was a lovely, lovely man. And we said, and his dog had died. On top of that, he lost both of his parents, and then his dog died. And he'd inherited this money. And he said, what should I do with this money? And we said, this is going to be very strange from a financial advisor, but we think that you should leave that money safe in the bank, do nothing at the moment, and go get another dog.
Yeah.
And he looked at us like, are you crazy? Like these other firms are telling me to invest it this way and invest it that way and do this. And we said, you are in too much of a state of grief at this point to make a clear decision
Yeah.
about what you want to do with this money and what this money means to you. So go get a dog, get through this, and then come back
Right.
when
Right.
you're feeling more centered.
Mhm.
Never make a heat of the moment decision like that.
Mhm.
And never let someone push you
Right.
to make a heat of the moment, like it has to be decided right now.
Right.
We have a saying that when we're making a fiduciary decision, nothing fiduciary needs to be decided in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We,
I try to tell people that all of the time. I mean, really, most situations you can sit on it, whether it's for a day or even a couple of days,
uh-huh,
right? You can
uh-huh.
sit on it, make sure you're not anxious, you're not
That's right.
angry, you're not whatever kind of
Mm-hmm.
over, loaded, flooded kind of emotion, so that you can make a good choice rather than
Mm-hmm.
feeling pressured into doing something quickly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was unorthodox advice that we gave him, but he sent us the nicest note several months later and said, "Thank you so much. It was exactly what I needed," and sent us a picture of his new dog. And
Oh,
that's
right.
the kind of work that makes our hearts sing.
Yeah.
All we
That's
did was
awesome.
try to do the right thing
Right.
for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Like, I don't know about other people who might watch this, but I'm already feeling calm. So
Oh,
thank you.
good. Well, thank you so much. And I think at this point, we just try to be safe and be well.
Right, I agree. I am hoping that Lisa and I will be doing something else together another time. We've talked about different topics that we can cover, so I hope that we'll work together again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.